Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Rod.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. I'm great. Happy
Awesome.
Monday.
Happy Monday. All right. It is 10 o'clock on the dot. Welcome to Office Hours with Rod McDermott, founder and CEO of Project Activate and CEO of McDermott and Bull Executive Search, one of the nation's top executive recruiting organizations with offices throughout the US, Canada, and Europe. Office Hours is a live video series where we answer your most challenging questions about landing a job, pursuing your dream job, and career advice. This session, please send in all your questions through the Q&A or through chat. We would love to answer them live with you. That is why you are here. I am your co-host, Kristen Farrenfort, and today's topic is how to make a great first impression in an interview. So, Rod,
Awesome.
we made it. We're
We
here.
did.
Second episode.
Number two.
Number 2 in the books already.
All right. All right. Hey, I wonder where everybody's coming from. Drop in the chat if you've got a second. We love to see where in this country or the world people are coming from. So, Kristen, how did they just drop that in the chat to all panelists, or how's that work?
Yeah, drop it in the chat to all panelists, maybe even all participants if you feel like you want to, make sure everyone's included. Let's see. We've got Vancouver, Canada.
Wow.
We are
County.
international. Orange County,
Denver.
Ooh,
Nice.
Denver.
I know. Denver got a lot of snow a couple weeks ago. We have an office in Denver, so I like getting up there.
Yeah.
Art from Simi Valley. Welcome, Art. Thanks for joining us today.
Right.
Winnipeg.
Wow,
we've got two people from the Great North. I love it. Actually, we have an office in Vancouver and I miss it. So hopefully we'll be able to get up there. Kristen, you've been to that office, right?
I have. I love Vancouver. How great is it? It's crazy how you have a mountain, but you're in a city.
You got the sea.
You got the snow, but then in spring, it's beautiful. You got it all up there.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Kristen said, make sure you put in the chat if you have any questions. One of the things that we pledge to do on this show is answer your direct questions. So if you've got something that's been challenging you, you've been a bridesmaid a couple of times in a job search, and you haven't been picked yet, something's stopping you, or you're concerned about age discrimination, or you're trying to figure out salary negotiations, or whatever's stopping you, throw it in the chat, throw it in the Q&A for us, and we're going to try and get to it today for sure. That's our pledge on these programs, is make sure we answer your hot questions. So I know we have our topic today. Kristen, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, let's kick it off. So our topic, how to make a great first impression in an interview. First of all, I love interviewing. I think it's so great. Worst case scenario, you're never going to see these people again. Best case scenario, you're going to see them and you got a new job, right? So putting it all out there. But when it comes to interviewing, how many interviews have you done throughout your career?
Gosh, so you're talking to me as a search consultant, right?
Right.
So, it's funny because I have a practice now. My practice does probably 25 searches a year. I've got practice partners in it though. Jared and Jason and Michael. So they do a lot of the interviews, but I'll tell you, back in the day when I was like day to day running my own practice and I'd work on 25 searches in a year, I probably would interview between 5 and 8 people per search. So what does that come to? As many as 200 people that I would interview in a year. And I did that for much of I've been in search now 22 years. So, I probably interviewed 4,000 or 5,000 people, not including the people that have come through our executive network, many of whom I've met with, also people that have come through Project Activate, many who have done mock interviews with me, and also the people we've hired at our own company. So I'll bet you it's north of 4,000 or 5,000 people.
Oof. Well, then that leads me to my next question. Is there someone, or is there anything that when people come into the room, like mannerisms physically, or things that they should say or shouldn't say, like right off the bat?
Yeah, no, this is great. So I would say the ones that get me in the best place at the very beginning of an interview are the ones that come in, they've got a very enveloping smile. They've got an energy and an aura about them that makes me want to like them and want to be their friend, especially if they're interviewing for a job with us, well, Kristen, you've worked with us twice,
right?
For many, many years. So we're all about culture, right? We're all about energy. We're all about, we don't generally, tolerate folks that just bring in a bunch of revenue and they're not great culture fits. That doesn't work for our company. So we want people who are going to build up our company, build up the coworkers, build up the culture of the business, create energy, right? And for me personally, I want to work with people that I'm going to enjoy hanging out with, And like we've got this trek we're doing at Project Activate starting right after this office hours. And I'm going out for 4 days with 6 different people around the Western U.S. visiting graduates of our Project Activate course and seeing how they're doing now and just meeting with them personally over the next 4 days. I wouldn't want to hang out with these guys. I mean, we have hikes planned. We have great dinners planned with our team. And if they're not giving me energy, I don't want to hang out with them. So for me, number one is when they walk into the room, what is the energy that they're giving off, right? And there's things that you can do to practice this, right? I'm a big believer that if you get together with friends of yours or family members, you can practice this, how you greet, how you come into a room, how you smile, right?
Right.
And you should do this in front of a mirror because you should see it yourself, or even better yet, film it. Right? Do a mock interview, walking into your own living room with your spouse or a good friend of yours, doing a greeting just as if you're walking into an interview room with somebody, or you're joining a Zoom, right? So many interviews are now happening over video. So if you're doing it over video, film it, right? And hey, this is the energy I'm giving off. And so you can see it yourself. Oftentimes we don't see it. I'll tell you one interview in particular I had many years ago. And this gal was phenomenal. She was such a good candidate for a job I was doing for a client that was about to go public, and they wanted a controller with public company experience. And this was a person who came in, and she didn't know this, but she had a very tight, jaw, and she had a very tight, she didn't smile. And she was very, very serious. And she kind of, my client was big on culture. I'm friends with the CEO. I've gotten to know the CFO. We recruited him to the company probably 15 years ago. And so he ended up calling me and said, she's probably the best candidate I've ever interviewed. And this is in his whole career as a CFO of multiple public companies. He said, my problem is I don't know that she's going to fit in our company because she doesn't smile. She's so darn serious. And she didn't even know she was doing it, right? And so after she didn't get this job, and I called her up and I said, and truthfully, I said, listen, here's the deal. They did have another candidate that they just felt was going to be a better fit with their company. And that was all true. She called me about 45 days later and she said, hey, I've been the bridesmaid too many times. What am I doing? And I said, okay, you really want to hear it? She goes, I want to hear it. Give it to me straight. And I told her, I said, you ask questions in an accusatory way. You're like an interrogator. You're like a prosecutor. If the company doesn't go public and we can't refinance this debt, what's going to happen? He's like, whoa, I can't have my finance person walking around saying stuff like that, and she's not wrong. She was phenomenal, but she just gave off this aura. And I said, you've got to, maybe do a little personal coaching and see if you can, this is where you bring calm to chaos, right? This is what your strength is, right? As a finance person, you got this. And everybody else in the company who might be worried, you've got to be the one who's creating calm. So that was, I give her a lot of props for actually calling me afterward. By the way, I'll say this to anybody who's on this. If you've had this happen to you before and you've gotten to know the person that you're interviewing with, maybe you've gone back for 2 or 3 rounds. I told one of our Project Activate members who didn't get a job from a company in San Diego, she interviewed with a COO and she goes, I was so bummed. She goes, I thought I was great for it. They told me I was great. They ended up going a different direction. I said, hey, why don't you put your neck on the line, crawl out on that gangplank over the sharks, and be willing to lead with your chin, get ready to get hit, and ask him why. Just ask him why. And she did. And he's like, nobody's ever called me after an interview and asked me why they didn't get the job. And he said, the way you did it, she called him and said, listen, I really wanted that job. And I get that you found somebody better. I want to know what was lacking in me, or I want to know if there were things I did or didn't do during the interview that put me in a different light, because I want to use that going forward, because I don't want to lose another job like this that I really want. He freaking loved her and referred her into somebody else that he knew and said, I think you're a better candidate than I gave you credit for. Let's face it, people, whoever's on here, I want to tell you, how many of us are career interviewers. None of us, hopefully.
No.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's we're not career interviewers. So, and I tell my clients this too. When somebody doesn't do as great on an interview, but they really liked them, I say, let's drill down on culture fit. How could you see working in the foxhole with this person? How could you see battling day to day the challenges of your business? And they're like, no, I can see that person doing great. And they just didn't, or maybe they weren't as polished on this one question I asked or something like that. I'm like, listen, you're not hiring somebody to interview at your company. You're hiring somebody to do the job. Right. So let's keep drilling down.
Ooh, that's good. That's really good. Have you ever been in an interview where someone has said, hold on, can we restart this? Have you ever had any like restarts in an interview that they went in and they're like, whoa. Also, would you, sorry, I'm caught up. I'm like now visualizing if someone kind of restarted, but if someone said, hey, let's restart this interview, I don't feel like my energy is it. Would you suggest that?
Oh yeah, for sure. One of the things that's really important is we have to realize that we're interviewing with real people, right? Mm-hmm. They've been through this before. Everybody's nervous in an interview. If you say, hey, listen, I'm a little nervous right now, let me tackle that a different way. You're being real, right? Either you don't address it and it's the elephant in the room that they knew about, you know about, you don't feel good about, and you walk out the door unaddressed, right? That's my big thing on interviews, guys. If you've got any elephants in the room, if you've had a lot of jobs in a short period of time, somebody's going to look at that and say, ugh. And if they don't ask you, they're going to form their own beliefs about it, right?
Right.
You're a job hopper. You quit when the going gets rough, or you quit before you're found out because you're not successful, or you get bored and you quit quickly and move on to other things. Address the elephant in the room. Even if you haven't been successful, even if some of these jobs you weren't successful, address it and tell them why you think this is the right fit going forward and why you're going to break that cycle. I have a friend of mine who's probably had 20 jobs in 30 years, no joke. And he's a good friend of mine. And I've counseled him on this. And I said, stop going back to the same well. Every time you go back to that well, you never succeed. Mm-hmm. You've been typecasted since college. He and I started working together after college. And that's not your calling. You know it and I know it. So don't keep going back there because it happens to be that industry is on your resume. Make a change and tell people the elephant in the room, address it. And yeah, because like I said, if you don't hit it, they're going to hit it on their own. Now we did get a question here. Are you looking at the chat right now?
Yeah,
sorry, I dropped my computer fell. So
but we're live. We're live. These things are going to happen. All right. Eric sent a really great question here. Your comments about culture fit and giving off a good aura makes complete sense. Is there ever a time when the company is looking for someone more serious? Which this question has already come in as well. How do you determine the type of culture fit of the company? Is there a way to do research in advance, or is it always lead with energy and smile?
Yeah, no. Hey, great questions, Eric. So lead with energy and smile is something that I think is a great go-to in almost every case. You don't have to be overly exuberant to come in with a smile and with energy, because it usually does kind of engage and envelop people, right? They get a feeling that they're not going to have to pull stuff out of you, right? So you don't have to be like on the edge of your seat excited, because that's not serious. And some companies are serious. It's interesting. I have another good friend of mine who runs a $500 million company. I've done a bunch of search for him. And I remember one candidate, I was recruiting a COO for him, and he was 30 minutes late to the lunch, right? With this candidate. My client was 30 minutes late. Now, truth be told, he had to fly. He had to get a rental car. He had to get out there. His flight was late. And he called the guy in advance and said, I'm going to be late. He shows up at the lunch, and the guy had taken his suit jacket off and put it around the chair and was sitting there without his jacket on. And I remember my client mentioning that to me. Now I'm thinking to myself, I don't care. I take my jacket off when I eat. What's the problem, right? But my client made a point about that. And so one of the things I realized after that is, and Eric, your question's a good question. You want to mirror your subject on the other side that you're trying to connect with. And so had this candidate, and this didn't disqualify him totally, he was still in the running. But had he done it better, what he probably would have done was kept his jacket on until he sees my client take his jacket off. My client never takes his jacket off. He eats with his jacket on, even when he and I go out to have a casual dinner. And then you mirror your target, right? And so think about that. Think about how they sit. Think about how they engage with you. Think about when they smile. Think about when they make jokes. So you can play with that. There's another way to do some research on this too. Look at the company website, right? See how the company, I'm going to put quotes around this, see how they play, right? Play can come in many forms. It could be pictures on the site about team building and other stuff that they do. Mm-hmm. It could be pictures of the CEO that maybe you can find on the internet, doing kind of self-deprecating things, maybe sitting in a dunk tank during the company picnic or something, who knows, right? But when you see stuff like that, or remember the ice bucket challenge years ago, Kristen?
Yeah, I do.
You know, I had friends of mine, CEOs of companies, who were doing that at their own company. They're like, this was the greatest thing in the world. Our employees saw me, and I run a big public company, take an ice bucket to the head.
Yeah.
Well, the water and ice to the head. And so find that stuff online and see if it's out there. And then you can kind of press on that. And as the interview goes, you'll see the way it goes. Right.
Right.
Is it more serious? Is it less serious? Is it a little more buttoned up? I'll give you one other example too. I have a guy that I knew years ago who was interviewing as a CEO for a company to take them public. Now, this was a tech-oriented company, and he was a tech guy, but he's a guy who's been on CNBC. He was a suit and tie guy. He walks into this company, and he's meeting the founder and all the guys who built the company and got it to a level that they're in the next 12 months going to be taken public. And these guys are like Birkenstocks, shorts, cargo shorts, T-shirts, and he walks in a suit and tie, and they're like, wow, you're like way overdressed for us. And he's like, hey, man, I can play at your game too. Now, if I'm taking us public and I'm going out to meet with Wall Street firms, you want me dressed like this, but let me show you what I could do. Boom, takes off his jacket, puts it in his jacket, and then, sorry, my microphone just kicked out. Can you hear me okay, Kristen?
All good.
Okay. And then pulls, unbuttons a little bit of his shirt, unbuttons his sleeves, rolls up his sleeves. He's like, okay, I'm wearing slacks and a shirt, but I'm like you guys now. So there is a way to jump in. And when you find you're not mirroring them all that well, you can have a little fun with it. He ended up getting the job, and they're like, you know what we liked most about you is you can fit inside and you can fit outside.
It's a great story. It reminds me of when I interviewed for Guess, and prior I was working with you, right? And we were business. And I went in, and this was a denim company, and I hadn't done my research and asking, hey, what should I look like in this interview? What should I wear? And I went in wearing a full slacks, suit, everything to the T, dressed, and everyone was wearing, practically mini skirts and denim, and everyone's fashionable. And I got the job. And I remember on the first day, or maybe not the first day, but in the first week, they said, Kristen, I'll never forget that you showed up in a full-blown suit and slacks. And like, I remember exactly what you were wearing. Like, I was memorable. I wasn't someone who just came in kind of assuming maybe I should wear denim, maybe I should wear this. But I remember being so insecure about it and calling my mom and being like, Mom, everyone was wearing denim. I don't look the part. I don't know if I'm going to get in. She's like, Kristen, you only get one time for a first impression. I'm sure it was fine. So it's interesting because, my energy mirrored the kind of energy they needed. I may have not looked like the denim on denim at that day, but it was something that, okay, you can eventually, throw on some denim on your first day.
Yeah. First impression is huge. And I always say, try to just dress one level above, not way more above. I'll give you another example, right? I'm a sales guy. I sell search. I run around and meet with companies all the time. One of the things I try to do is I try to look up if I'm meeting with a CEO, look up the CEO. And I'll give two examples. There was a guy that I met, of Bombardier Aerospace. Okay. And, a few mic problems. Is everything okay, Kristen?
Sounds good.
Good. Okay, perfect. And he was dressed to the nines. I was actually interviewing him at a aviation trade show, and the guy had French cuff shirts and like great suits. And, this guy was dressed to the nines. And then I remember the CEO of Textron Aircraft based in Wichita. It's a little different. Bombardier is based in Montreal. more of a city. He's a city guy, global. Textron's a little different. They're more kind of wholesome. Him, and he's wearing a sport jacket and slacks, and he's not wearing a tie. And so when I looked online to see how these guys were going to be, or how they were portrayed in online photos of them at different events, I knew how I needed to dress. It was suit, no tie, and not a real flashy suit. And with the CEO of Bombardier, it was, flashy. I remember him saying, "Hey, I really like your suit. That's a great combo. French cuffs, suit, great tie." And he's telling me that. And I'm like, "Yeah, you dress well too, man." And we hit it off. They're both, we've done business with both. And so, but you got to mirror who you're meeting with. And so you can find those things. One of the things I was gonna share too is a lot of folks don't update their wardrobe, right? And I want you to think about this, right? Imagine you've got a meeting with Congress, right? You're going to go present to Congress, or you're going to be interviewed on TV, and it's going to be on CNBC, or it's going to be on CNN. It's going to be on something that's watched widely or whatever. There's going to be millions of viewers out there. You're going to make sure you look great. You're going to make sure you are dressed to the nines. An interview is the same kind of thing, right? You're setting yourself up to maybe land something that could be life-changing. But what I've seen is people won't necessarily update their look, right? If they had to update their look in years because they came out of a private or a casual company, right? Now they're going into something that's maybe a little less, the interview is less casual. They need to update their look. Guys, make a trip to Nordstrom. Guys and gals both, make a trip to Nordstrom, update your look, maybe even meet with an image consultant and have a one-on-one and say, I want to make sure that the image I'm portraying is the image that is, kind of in line with today's thinking. And if I'm wearing clothes that I wore 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed executives come in my office and I look at them and I'm like, I think that's like a 15-year-old suit. Oof. Or same thing, dress or suit for women as well. It just is not in with today's standards. I would challenge you, please make sure that first impression that you make, just like Kristen said, it's so important. Take a trip over to Nordstrom on the weekend, get the right stuff, look the part. It's really, really important.
Really important. And look, we have about 8 minutes or so. So please, everyone, send in your questions as we're going through them right now. So we talked a little bit about, what we should be wearing, right? So on the physical portion of it, let's talk a little bit about, I got a question coming. Let's talk a little bit about the actual, very beginning of the first question, maybe.
Yeah.
I got this in, it's from Tom. He said, I'm a pretty personable guy and I could really chat it up with anyone. But when it comes to interviews, I get so nervous. For example, in one interview, they asked how I start my day. And I was so nervous, I gave them in detail that I brush my teeth, I get my clothes on, decide what I'm going to have for breakfast, and so on and so on. Needless to say, it wasn't necessarily the answer that they were looking for. So how do I show up as myself without panicking and dropping the ball?
Yeah. Okay. So Tom, here's the thing. Practice, right? Practice a whole bunch of different things. It's interesting. Interviewing is a lot like selling, and people that are great in sales have to know how to handle objections being thrown at them from 16 different ways. And so, I've learned this over my career. I've also, I think Kristen, you and I worked together back then. I took an improv class.
Yeah.
Probably, how long ago was that? 8 years ago?
8 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. And I did that because I wanted to be able to think on my feet a little better. So it was a 10-week course. And it was so much fun because what you realize is, as long as you don't take yourself too seriously, you can have fun and engage people. During the time, I was doing a lot more public speaking. I was getting in front of big groups, and I hadn't done a lot of that in my career. So improv helped me get really comfortable with that. Yeah, somebody is saying Toastmasters is a great resource for thinking on your feet. Same thing, Karen. Thanks for sharing that, Karen. So if you can practice, That's a really, really big key. And then also just hear how you sound, right? So here's a question that throws people off. It's kind of like, how do you start your day? It's like, well, tell me about yourself. I ask that question sometimes. No joke. And you know me, Kristen, if I'm interviewing somebody at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I might literally go down. That's my energy low of the day. So most of the people I work with know not to set me up with a 2 o'clock interview anymore. I'm great at like 3:30 on, and I'm not so great from 1:30 to 3:30, but I can literally fall asleep on a story. So when I say, tell me about yourself, let's say you ask me that question. I'm going to try and time myself, Christian. Tell me about myself. You're asking me this question.
All right. Tell me a little about yourself, Rod.
Okay, great. So here's how I'd answer it. I would say, yeah, I grew up in San Diego. My dad ran a company down there. I ended up going to UCLA and started my career in banking in New York. Always wanted to live in Manhattan. Citibank moved me to Houston, where I worked for a couple of years, and then I made my way back to California and worked in banking for a while. Decided that wasn't my passion and starting companies. And I've started a few companies since then. If you want me to tell you more about those, I'm happy to do it. But ended up getting into an executive search. The last company I was involved in, I was a 10% shareholder, VP of sales and marketing of a computer security company. And I realized it wasn't the life I was meant to live. And so I decided to make a change, get into an industry where I controlled my own destiny, my comp, my time. I wasn't traveling all the time. And that's how I got into executive search. That's probably less than 60 seconds, and then I might say something like, if there's anything you want me to expand on, I'm happy to expand on. They might be like, well, tell me about the businesses you started. Well, okay, the first one I started was blah, 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 right? So don't use a question as an open-ended opportunity to sit there and suck all the air out of the room for the next 5 minutes, because they're not going to listen, right? People don't have that attention span anymore.
No, I don't.
Somebody once accused me of having the attention span of somewhere between a Post-it note and a business card. And
oh my God, what a visual.
I know. It's a really short attention span. But, we move on, right? We're in this multitasking society these days. And so we've got to be able to engage and make sure that our audience is connecting with us. So I think we have another question.
Yeah, we do. Thomas here. I've been on the market for 3 months now. Do you tell them that you've been laid off in the initial interview, or hold off on it until the interview progresses further?
Yeah, great question. So I have very, very strong beliefs on this, and I might be wrong. So if you don't agree with me, do what you feel comfortable with. But let me tell you my beliefs. A lot of people hold off on talking about the elephant in the room. There's a problem with that, in my opinion. The problem is they might think you're holding back on other things too, right? If they find out, and then I have this other belief that says everybody knows everything, right? So whenever I interview somebody, like I interviewed a guy today, this morning, and he told me we're 150 LinkedIn people in common, right? And we started throwing out names of people we know. I'm shocked I've never met him before, but we know a lot of the same people. I'm going to pick up the phone and call 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
Right. So many people know so many people these days. You've got to think in terms of, they're going to find out I've been laid off after that first interview. And if they find out, will they think differently of me because I didn't disclose that? Right now, what's the story I can tell about being laid off? Right. So I have a very good friend of mine who worked for an insurance company. They did 3 rounds of layoffs during COVID. And he was in the last round that took out his whole division, the VP all the way down. And he got laid off. I mean, it happened. So, but he was in the last of 3 rounds. And so he and I talked about the story, and I said, I think your story is, yeah, I don't know if you heard, they laid off, they took our VP out plus 8 people in my group, and I'm one of them. It was our 3rd round. The first round was last March, and they put a lot more work on our group. And then the next round was in November, and they put a lot more group. And then I got whacked in January. And, they took good care of me. I've been there for 7 years. They're actually paying me for 14 months. So I'm in good shape. They've been really, really generous to me. And, they tried to keep me as long as possible, but they just didn't have enough business to support. So that's why I'm out. Tell the story. Be truthful about it. By the way, he landed a job within 2 weeks because he's honest with his story. He's a great worker. People know him really well, and they like the work that he does. And so all the people that got laid off in round 1 and round 2, his coworkers that liked him, they all called him and said, you got to come work here. And he had a bunch of interviews, literally within 2 weeks, got a job. So Thomas, my belief is, Go honest early, stay honest throughout the entire time. Tell them what happened. By the way, some people get fired, right? Raise your hand. I don't think if you raise your hand, I'll just see the number of hands raised. I won't see who raised it, but raise your hand if you've ever been fired from a job. I want to see how many hands get raised. Okay, I'm seeing 4 or 5. Kristen, did you just raise your hand?
No, I was raising hands as I was.
There's like 7 hands raised now, 6 or 7 hands raised. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. So out of the 4,000 people, 4,000 to 5,000 people I've interviewed, I want to tell you that not one has ever told me they've been fired from a job. Not one, literally not one. And here's the thing. Everybody on the other side of the table knows it happens. Sometimes they've been fired too. Own it. Hey, I screwed that up. Yeah, I don't know if you heard about that, but I really screwed that up. I'll give you one example because I know we're running out of time, but I used to be involved in the Orange Coast Venture Group, which was a VC community thing in Orange County. I was on the board and I did a panel interview and I invited 2 CEOs of mine, both guys, CEOs of pretty good sized companies, both sold for between 200 and 300 million. So they had good exits. And one guy got up there and he was talking. And I said, "Hey, Doug, let me ask you about this other venture deal you did. It was your first venture deal, right? You left Symantec and you went to this company." He's like, "Yeah, I did." And he goes, I screwed it up. I mean, we raised 75 million and we pissed through that money in less than a year." And he goes, "I had all this pressure from the board to ramp up production and do all this. And it was against my instincts about, let's make sure the market's there. And we built 60,000 units and we only sold 6,000. So we literally built 10 times more than we needed. And I just went with the board and the flow and everything else and against my instincts." I said, "Wow." I said, "What happened?" He goes, they chopped me. And he goes, "But here's what I learned." Right. And then he shared with 300 people in the room, chapter and verse, the things he learned. He got picked up by another VC firm. And I was friends with the VC who picked him up. And he said, "This guy just went to school on somebody else's dime. I want that education. I want him working for us." And he took a company that had raised 10 million, was down to probably their last 2 or 3. They needed to raise another round. He was able to get that. And they ultimately sold the company for close to $300 million. It was a great exit for everybody, including him and the VCs, because they saw that he learned this. Guys, we're not all perfect. We all make mistakes at some points. And sometimes those mistakes get us fired. Let's own it. Let's get out and say, that job I got fired from. Let me tell you why. And I think when you own that, people know that you're honest. Yeah. When they know that you're honest, they feel a sense of trust. Yeah. By the way, the person you're interviewing with, they probably got fired once too.
Good. And there you go. You can both relate one another, right?
Yeah. I'm going to answer this one question. I know we're out of time, but Doug asked a question. I was the CEO of a startup tech company that went bankrupt due to COVID. How should I present this news without it being defined as a failure? Hey, don't mind it being defined as a failure. By the way, we all have failures, and failure is the best teacher. Most leaders know that. So don't try to sugarcoat it. Say what it is, man. Own it and just say, "Hey, listen, here's what." And by the way, if it wasn't a failure, well, bankruptcy is kind of hard to not be a failure, but I think you just own it and you say, "Here's what happened. Here's what the market did. Here's how we could have reacted. Here's how we did react. Looking back on it, I wish I'd done this, this, and this, but there was not much I could have done." By the way, unless you were moving, from tech to making masks, I mean, maybe there's nothing you could have done during COVID, Doug, to save your company. There are some companies that went bankrupt and there's probably no answer in some cases for what they could have done. None at all. Depends on what your leverage was, how much cash you had in the bank. There's a lot of things. I had a friend of mine who almost tanked his company last year, had to almost basically drown it. I'm doing a CFO search for him right now. His sales dropped by 60%. He had to furlough 50 of his 55 people for a long time, and he's got them all back. His business is on a tear right now. He'll probably grow 4x from what he did in 2020 COVID, which will be 1.5 times what he did in 2019. But he was on thin ice for so long. He hung out there just on a wing and a prayer and was able to make it through. So somebody actually said COVID should be the greatest mulligan of all time. I've heard about mulligans like this in my career, right? The Great Recession, anybody coming out of finance and mortgage, they got a mulligan. The tech recession, when I'm talking to a CFO who's out of work, I'm saying, "Hey, what happened here?" 9/11. Okay, 9/11 was a mulligan for a lot of people. So don't be afraid to be honest about it. Don't be afraid to define it as a failure. If it is a failure, own it 100%. Honesty and transparency is what people really want these days.
Awesome. Wonderful. Wow. Great questions, you guys. This is awesome. We are out of time.
All right.
Out of time. But thank you everyone for joining us. Next week will be how to answer the question, what are your weaknesses? Pretty great. It's a great question. It's a good one.
Follow on to this. It's a good follow on to this. You might say, listen, I missed this happening in my industry or my company, and it ended up being fatal. So yeah, come back next week, guys. If this has been good for you, feel free to shoot Kristen. Kristen, do they have your email address?
Yep, they do. I'll send it through the chat, and everyone send me any questions that you might have that we weren't able to get through today. And we can get back to you. Otherwise, we'll see everyone next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks, everyone. All right. Thank you.
Kristen. See ya.
See ya.